Well, to talk a bit more then about that humanitarian situation in Gaza, I'm very pleased to be joined in the studio by Lucile Marbeau. She's a spokesperson for the International Committee of the Red Cross. Good afternoon, and thanks for coming in. You have teams on the ground in Gaza right now, don't you? So what are you hearing from them about the situation for civilians, 6 days into the bombing campaign?
Well, the situation is absolutely dire, as since a few days, nothing is coming in Gaza, which was already, the population there was already weakened anyway by 16 years of restrictions of movement in goods. So it comes on top of this already very unstable and terrible situation for the civilians. Right now, there's no more electricity. The only electricity plant in Gaza is no longer working. This means that, for instance, there's some desalination center plants which also don't function anymore. So there's lack of also clean water for the population and lack of electricity. Now there's shortages also in fuel, make that hospitals who heavily rely now on generators soon won't have any more electricity, any power, which means that they won't be able to operate anymore the war wounded. We have to think also about all the other patients they have. Dialysis won't be able to happen anymore. So really, if nothing comes in, if electricity isn't switched on again, if there isn't any more fuel coming in, hospitals just won't be able to operate. It's going to be a disaster.
Yeah,
so what the ICRC is calling to now, of course, is for goods to be able to come in, supplies, electricity to come back, reminding also the parties that this is an obligation in regard to international humanitarian law. Civilians must be able to have access to all their basic needs, and that includes, of course, access to healthcare.
Yeah, and tell us about to what extent your staff are able to operate now in Gaza, because I know 4 members of the ICRC have been killed in Gaza since this campaign began. I mean, maybe tell us, if you can, what has happened with them, and if you're able to operate, given how dangerous it clearly is for your own staff.
So just as a rectification, it isn't 4 ICRC, International Committee of the Red Cross colleagues who have been killed. It's 4 volunteers from the Palestinian Red Crescent who were unfortunately killed while they were trying to carry out their life-saving work. And this shows to which point it's very difficult for the medical mission to be able to operate in this very volatile and dangerous situation. And they need to be able to do that work without their lives being in danger. So there again, we remind the parties of the sacredness, let's say, of the medical mission and of medical staff to be able to go to where the wounded are. And it's actually quite terrible. There was also in Israel a volunteer from the Magen David Adom, which is like the Red Cross in Israel, who also was killed in doing his mission. For our staff now, for the ICRC, we were able in the beginning to give supplies to some hospitals. But now what they're telling us is that we do still have supplies in certain warehouses, but we can't access them because of the ongoing hostilities. It's just not safe. And if we at some point do reach those warehouses where we have, for instance, chlorine, there's some fuel, this can be a drop of help, let's say. But if goods don't come back in, if electricity isn't switched back on, it won't be enough for all the needs that are growing day by day.
Indeed, and we know that under international humanitarian law, civilians need to be protected. Collective punishment is a crime under international law. From what you're seeing at the moment, does it look like those laws are being breached?
We are in a constant dialogue, which is confidential and bilateral. This is really the way we operate in any conflict in the world, is that we are really first going to talk directly to the decision makers, directly to the militaries in order to remind them of their legal obligations, which, as you say, is to spare civilians in civilian infrastructure, everything which guarantees basically the livelihood of the civilian population. And this is where also, of course, asking for assistance to be able to go in, for protection for the healthcare workers. And this dialogue is continuous. It was happening before the escalation of violence. And of course, now it's just more continuous than before.
Now, one really important issue we have to talk about is the fate of hostages that are being held in Gaza at the moment. We believe it's about 150 people who are stuck there. We know the ICRC has said it's trying to do what it can to perhaps mediate for the hostages. I don't know what language you would use, but just explain to us what the ICRC is trying to do and how well it's going.
So from the start, ICRC reminded that taking hostages is illegal under international humanitarian law, and the first thing is that they should be released. But we know this is a very political issue. Obviously, it would need political will. So what we are offering now is to facilitate the release once it may, we hopefully happen. But before that, we want to go see the hostages and of course, check on their well-being and be able also to give news to their families who are desperate for news since Saturday. And just to finish, why the ICRC basically is that we are a neutral intermediary. We have trust and we talk with all the different parties in a confidential way, which is reassuring, of course, for them. And this puts us in a position to be able to facilitate all that. We can't do miracles. It depends really on the political will. So we're pushing for it. We hope it's going to happen. But this is very sensitive and it's going to take time.
And just to clarify one thing, you haven't then been able yet to reach those hostages and check on their well-being, but you're actively trying to do so. All right, thank you very much. Lucile Marbeau there talking to us from the International Committee of the Red Cross. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.